Hi guys, good evening and welcome. This is Primus again with Primus Learning. Last video, we created an AWS account, introduced you to what AWS is, and this video today will be focused on a couple of things. So let me just go ahead and share with you what we'll look at today. So we will be starting with a service in AWS called IAM, and we will learn how to create IAM users. And then we'll attach policies to our users. We will do this through the AWS console. The AWS console is that user interface that I showed you where we logged in and walked through the various services. We'll do that from that console, and we'll do that from the AWS CLI, which is another thing that I will introduce you to. Then we'll also do that again through Terraform, which is yet another thing that I'll introduce you to, guys. So that's how today's session would look like. It's a lot of things, but trust me, by the end of this session, you should be able to create IAM users. You should also be able to attach permissions to those users so that they can literally be able to perform actions in your AWS account. And we'll also do that programmatically. So I'll be showing you the best way to do that, right? Or the recommended way to do that when you're working for an organization. So guys, this will walk you through the first phase. I'll explain what IAM is, and we'll walk through step by step how to create users and how to use them. All right. So what is IAM? IAM is identity and access management, right? The AWS identity and access management. And it is simply a web service that helps you to control access to the various AWS resources that you have. Remember last video, we walked you through the various services that you have in AWS, and we created an AWS account, and I showed you something as the root user, and we logged in and we're able to walk through all those services. That root user already has all the permissions that it needs to access all of those resources. But that is usually not the best way for organizations to access resources in AWS, because with that type of permission, you are not able to give the users who work for your organization access to AWS. If you share it with everyone, and something happens with that one account, then you've messed up your whole account, right? So you don't want to do that yet. You don't want to just go ahead and do and grant root user permissions to all your workers in your organization. That's a very bad way. AWS doesn't recommend that. So there is a way to centrally manage those permissions, and those permissions can control which AWS resources users have access to. So you use IAM to control who is authenticated. Authenticated here means who is signed on, authentication, who has access to sign into that account, and authorization, who has permissions to do what. You are authenticated, but you are not yet permitted to do something. Unless you are permitted to do something and to take an action in AWS, you will not have permissions. You will not have those permissions. You don't have the right to do that thing, right? And that's why when we create the users will be naked. They will not have permissions to do anything. You'll be able to authenticate yourself. You'll be able to log in, but you will not have permissions to do any actions in the account. But then when we grant permissions, when we attach permissions to those users, you should be able to access those resources. That is what IAM is, guys. And really, this is a huge service in AWS. Once you know this service, you are almost ready to go, right? You're almost ready to go. All right. So look at what we'll be looking at today, right? So we will have our AWS account, which we created last week. So we created an AWS account and we logged in and we walked through some services. I showed you some database services. I showed you compute services. I showed you different types of services. That is how it looks, right? So today we'll learn how to create an IAM user. So this is the user we're calling IAM user. And how are we creating that user? Through a service in AWS. So we'll log into AWS with our root user. So we created a root user last week. We'll log into AWS with that root user, and we'll use the IAM service to create an IAM user. And then you see there's some action that's going there. We will also attach a policy, an IAM policy. This is IAM policy. We'll attach an IAM policy to that user that we've created. And then through the permissions that we've granted through that permission, through that policy, that user should be able to access all these resources, should be able to access S3, should be able to access RDS, should be able to access EC2 instances, create them, do things depending on the permissions we are granting that user. So if you grant administrator permissions, that user will be able to do what? Will be able to use all the services in AWS except the billing service. So I'll show you how that works. Right. So this is absolutely important. One other thing that I wanted to show you before we go into this IAM thing is the fact that AWS accounts are free, right? I told you AWS accounts are free, but there is a limit to that freedom, right? There's a limit to how free your AWS account is. And so I will show you a technique that you can use to monitor your account and make sure that the services that are free, they are free to a certain degree. So there's what is called AWS free tier. You can look at the documentation, AWS free tier, and see what the freedom it's defining means, right? So it will tell you the kind of services that are free and how long they are free and how much you can use them, right? So if you go into this documentation here, so it's loading, you see the free tier services that AWS offers. You see the free trials. You see, click here, you'll be able to see the free trials that AWS offers. So there are three types of offers, actually. There's the 12 months free tier. Once you create your AWS account, you have free tier services for most of the services for a period of 12 months. That's a huge, huge bonus that AWS is giving there. So you can click here to see the services that are free for 12 months, right? So you click in and you scroll down here, you can see services like compute, databases, storage, containers, and so on. And this on the EC2 part says it is free for 750 hours. Once we'll be creating an EC2 instance, you will see how it will tell you free tier. So when you're creating an instance and you use the free tier instance, it means that you have 750 hours of free EC2 instance to use for 1 month. So if you go above 750 hours, AWS will start billing you. And these are the machine types that you see here. You will see T2 micro or T3 micro, and then you see T3 micro, and it tells you the number of hours, and then it also tells you plus IPv4 address regardless of instance type. And then for storage, it gives you 5 GB storage for free. AWS gives you 5 GB storage for free. So when you go above 5 GB storage, it will start charging you. For RDS instances, which is relational database instances in AWS, you would have 750 hours of free tier, right? So there are more services here. You guys can take a look at the free tier services and then also explore these ones that are totally free and check those that are always free no matter what, right? So if you click here, you should be able to see the services that are always free in AWS. So if you let's see, always free, click on always free, and you see Amazon DynamoDB is always free, 25 gigabytes, AWS Lambda 1 million requests, unlimited. Amazon Code Whisper is unlimited. Some are I think the content delivery network here, which is CloudFront, is 1 terabyte free, and so on and so forth. These are services that are free always and are not limited to the 12 months, right? So you have to hit these numbers before they will go above those amounts. So you guys can take a look at this documentation and just go through it and see to make sure that you are within the free tier once you're creating resources in AWS. And you can, to prevent you from noticing bills that are not that you don't know about, right? What we'll do here, we'll go to the billing dashboard, billing. So let's go to the AWS billing and cost management service and create for ourselves a notification. We want to create a budget for ourselves and tell AWS to notify us in case our bills become heavy, in case our billing starts, in case we start going above a particular threshold that we'll define for ourselves. So let's go down here and go to budgets. So we want to set a budget for ourselves, right? We want to define a budget for ourselves so that we don't go above the amounts that we really intend to not hit. So we want to create a budget. So you go to budget and create a budget. Just hit on create a budget and then use a template. So we want to use a template, and here we want to define a monthly budget so that we don't go above this amount. You can name it my monthly cost budget or something like that, right? You could just change the name and say Primus Learning Series budget. You can do it for yourself. And then here's the dollar amount. You could say, hey, I don't want to go above $5 every month, right? So if it reaches a threshold that is $5, please notify me. And then you want to give the email address that will be notified here. So I'll pass the email here, and the email will be Primus Learning Series at yahoo.com, which is the same email that I used while creating this account. So you could give any email, right? And you could separate it by commas if you want to do, if you want to send to so many other persons. And then the maximum number of email recipients is 10. So you can send it to up to 10 persons. Now, what would happen? AWS will notify you in 3 circumstances. The first circumstance would be when your actual spend reaches 85% of that amount. So it will notify you when it's 85% or $5. And then when your actual spend reaches 100%. So it will notify you again when it reaches $5. And then if your forecast spend is expected to reach $100, it will notify you if after analysis, right? AWS uses machine learning to analyze your account and see, hey, all right, you're using this number of services this way consistently. So if we average that, we think that you can hit the 5% in this time on this date. AWS will estimate that and send you a forecast, right? And send you an email. So AWS can actually send you emails in 3 circumstances. Once you are hitting the threshold, once you are 85% to the threshold, and a forecasted time telling you that you will reach the threshold. So let's do this. This is all you need to do, and you create. AWS will send you a budget once this threshold has been hit. It will send you an email reminding you, and you can go in and clean up the services that you have in your AWS account. This is very important, guys. Very, very, very important, because sometimes you can think that you are not built while you're actually built, right? So this is actually very, very important. So you could always see your bills as well. This is the console where you come in and see your bills. You see your estimated bills, you see how much your account has used, and so on. And this is where you can watch and see the various services. Remember, I told you, there are some services that are global. A service like this billing dashboard is global, right? You see it's global here. But once I move to, for instance, EC2 instance, you see the region. So always make sure you are in one region so that resources that you create in that particular region you can access those resources quickly, right? You don't want to spread your resources and maybe forget someday and you are not able to notice that something is still running in your AWS account. That is only to avoid billing, guys. Very, very important. All right, that was the quick one. Now let's go back to our main thing of the day, which was the IAM user. So once we've logged in here, right, you want to search for IAM. You just want to type these 3 characters IAM, which is identity and access management. We've discussed that, and we say it is the way it's simply a web service where AWS, grants you access to be able to authenticate yourself. And also, once permissions are added to that user is able to access the particular resources which we called authorization. You're authorized to access a particular resource. All right, you see, this is how the IAM dashboard looks, guys. Very nice. And of course, once you create a user, this is how the dashboard looks at first. We've not created any user for now, right? Once you create a user, you see the user will appear under users. You could also create a group, right? You could also create a group, and that group would be called a group of users. For instance, in your organization, you could have a group of developers. You want to create a group of developers. That's a best practice. That's the best way you could do it, right? You want to create a group of developers, and each user that you create who is a developer, you simply add to that group of developers, right? You could do that in your organization. So that will save you a lot of time, rather than creating one user and then attaching permissions to them. So let me just walk you through all of these, right? So the first thing is creating a group. A group is simply a kind of grouping of users, right? Grouping of resources in AWS. So you see, a user group is a collection of IAM users. Use groups to specify permissions for a collection of users. So it's just a bundling together of users who would have the same type of permissions. Users, you want them to have the same permissions, you would put them under one group. So we can go ahead here and create a group, right? We can create a group of you called administrators. Administrators. So this is a group that we've created. And now you see, I've created the group. I want to create the group without attaching permissions to that group. So I've gone ahead and created a group called administrators. These administrators, this is an empty group. It doesn't have any permissions. I can actually decide to go and add permissions to this group. You see, I'll go under the permissions tab and add permissions. So I'll attach permissions, and I can say, hey, I want to attach administrator permissions to this group called administrators, and I'll go ahead and attach permissions to this group called what? Called administrators. So if I refresh here, you should see that this group has administrator permissions. I could create another group called maybe developers. And in that group, I know that the developers will be accessing a particular service, and I grant them access only to that particular service. Let's say S3. I'll create a group of developers, and those developers, I want them to be able to access only the S3 service. I will then grant them just the S3 permissions. That's how you can deal with those. All right, so users, that's it about groups. Now, groups are empty without users, right? Groups do not have direct access. It is the users who would have access. So you can create a user and add that user to a group, or you create a user and directly you don't add that user to any particular group, right? So, and that user will still have access, the permission that you give it. All right, so let's do this. Let's go ahead and create a user. We'll create a user here called Primus Learning user. Let's call this this user Primus Learning user. We can grant that user console access, AWS Management Console access, this console. We can let that user be able to log into this console. We could also remove this and grant that user only access through the terminal, only kind of CLI access, but we want to grant this user the permissions to be able to log in here and log out, right? So you see, you can specify that I want to create an IAM user. That means that user needs to have a password so that they will log in to this place. So we'll go ahead and give a password to this user. I'll just give a simple password that I can remember. so that I should be able to log into this user, right? So I've given this user a password. You see, it says auto-generated password. You can view the password after you create the user. So you could also take this to auto-generate, and then you can also show the user. And here you can select this when you want the user to change their password the first time they're logging in. You remember when you're creating a user for for your organization, you don't want to even know the password, so you can auto-generate it and and download it and then send them an email and let the users change their password, because you don't want to know people's passwords, right? That's not a good practice. But for this one, I will just unselect this. I will not want to change this password because we are just doing a demo right here. All right, so we'll allow it this way and go to next, click next. And you see, there is a group here. I can attach this user to this group, or I can just leave that user like that. For now, I will not attach this user. If I attach this user, the user will have administrator permissions already to do things inside here. But I don't want to attach these permissions yet. So I will not attach this user to a particular group. What I would do is I will just go to next and review. This is, you just review what you've done and create this user. Once you create the user, you see that the user will have a username, which is Primus Learning -user, which I gave it. And then the user will also have a password. You can download this as a CSV and send it to that user. I've created two already. I created one just to test things, and then this one again. So you can actually download it as a CSV and just send the CSV to the user, right? And then if you want to go to this user directly, if you want to access this user, you need to click here or just copy this link, because it already has the account number to log into an AWS account with an IAM user. Remember, I told you we are creating this user because it's not best practice to always sign in with the root user. Very important. You have to notice that. So you can copy this because you will need this account number. When you create an AWS account, it will have an AWS account number. This account number, right? 637423222780. This is the same number. So you want to copy this URL, you auto-populate. When you go to this URL, to auto-populate this account number on the user. So remember, we've created this user. We have not granted this user any permissions, but this user has some permissions. Notice that when you create a user, they will first of all have permissions only to change their password. Remember, if and only if you let them to change their password, right? But we didn't allow this user to change their password, so those permissions were not added, right? So they don't have any permissions. You see, they are just empty, empty, empty. All right, so let's go to a browser and paste what we just copied, which has the account ID already, and just hit enter. Once you hit enter, it will take you to a login page. All right, so first of all, I need to sign out. Let me sign out from this account. Let me make sure I'm signed out from this account. This is the first account, so why it's taking a sweet moment here. Yep, all right, I'm signed out, right? So it takes me here because this account here already was active. I click, I already did it, it locked me out. You see, to sign in as an IAM user, using that link, it automatically brings me here. It asks for your account ID or alias. This is the account ID. For now, let's use the account ID. I'll talk about the alias later. And then here you have to pass the username, right? The username of that user, which is Primus Learning -user. Remember that user was Primus Learning -user that we created. And then you have to remember your password, guys. If you don't remember your password, you will not be able to log in. I think I do remember mine. And then you can sign in. So this time we are signing in as an IAM user. Look at us. we are signing in as an IAM user. It is different from the way we signed in the last time as the root user. If I had to sign in as the root user, I will change this. I will not sign, you see, I will sign in using a root user. This is different. We're signing in as the IAM user. I will log in and log back out to show you the difference. All right, now let me sign in. You see, I'm signing in. I'll just save this for now because we'll be using this user. You see, I've signed in as this user right here. But this user, remember, we didn't grant any permissions to this user. So this user, you see, already see access denied because this user is able to authenticate. It is able to log into AWS, but it is not able to access resources. It is not authorized. You see the difference between authentication and authorization. This user, the Primus Learning Dash user, is able to authenticate to AWS, to the AWS console or to the AWS management console, but it is not able to access resources. It is not authorized. Remember, we skipped that step to add permissions to the user or to attach. They call it attach permissions or add permissions. We didn't attach permissions to that user. And so if you go to any service, this user will not have access. So you see, and the user cannot give itself access because it doesn't even have that IAM permissions to do that, right? You see, if I go here and create instance, I will not be able to create an instance. You see, it will just give you all these errors because this user doesn't have the permissions to do anything. If I click here and try to create, it will just tell me this user doesn't have access. That's how all the services would be because this user here doesn't have the access to do anything. You see, it's allowing me to do this, but when you click launch, it will just tell you this user doesn't have permissions to do that. That is what this user is when permissions have not been granted it. It is not authorized to access all those services and use them. It is only authorized to log in, to authenticate. It is only allowed to authenticate. Now, let's log out. So we want to go sign out of this account. Let's sign out of this account and sign back in using the root user. So want to sign in again. You see that there are two ways to sign in: root user and this type of user. So this time I don't want to sign in as an IAM user, but I want to sign in as a root user. You see what I'm doing? Oh, sorry, no, not as this. Sorry, let me, I just clicked on the wrong place. So let me sign out and sign in as root. So I want to sign in, but this time I want to sign in as root, not as that user. This is where I wanted to click sign in using root user email. Now it will ask me for the email. I'll pass the email address that we used when we're creating this account. You see the difference? This is IAM user and this is root user. IAM will ask you for that account ID, right? Remember that account ID? Yes, it will ask you for that account ID. You need to provide it. And then this root user, it asks you for the root email, which is the email we used while we created this AWS account. These are two different things. This user is the account owner and it performs tasks unrestricted with unrestricted access. It has all the access that is required. While the IAM user is a user within an account that performs daily tasks. So this is the type of user you want to grant your developers, your administrators, anybody who does things. This one, you just want to keep it aside. Do not access your AWS account frequently using the root user, except you want to do some really serious things, like restricting a user, deleting a user. Administrators can do that. They can delete users. But I mean, if an administrator is going woke, you can log in as a root user and delete that and kick them out, right? So that's the thing. All right, so let's log in as Primus Learning Series at yahoo.com. That's the email we created. So we're logging in as a root user. And let me see if I remember the password. All right, let's log in. Okay, I remember my password. my root user password. And you see this user is Primus Learning Series. That's how we named this user, right? Okay. And now let's go back to IAM. Remember, when you visit services, it will show the services here. You can click directly here, or you just search for IAM here again, and it will just come up. So we're searching for IAM. I'll go to the IAM dashboard. IAM has a complete dashboard. Remember, I've not talked about roles and policies. Now, what we'll be doing, we'll go to that user and attach a policy to that user. A policy is simply a document that AWS, it's just a statement, a document, and that document states the type of permissions that you want to attach to a user. Those are the actual permissions that you attach to users. Now, we'll go to users. You see, we have this user called Primus Learning User, and we want to do something for this user. We want to attach a permission to this user so that this user, when they log next in, they can be able to create resources. You not see all those errors again, right? This is what we want to do with this user. So we'll go ahead and come in here. You see where you go to the user and go to add permissions and add permissions. Now, you could simply copy over the permissions of the group. Remember, we created a group called administrators and we granted that group administrator access. This is the policy we attached to it. Now, we will not do that. I want to show you that you can actually give a user permissions directly as well. So to give that user direct permissions, don't add this. You simply go to attach policies directly, and AWS always tells you what they want you to know. It says attach a managed policy directly to a user. As a best practice, we recommend attaching policies to a group instead. That's what it's saying. In that case, we would select this, but that's the best practice. AWS is telling you the difference between those two. You need to know the difference. Then add the user to the appropriate group. That's what they are telling us. But we want to attach a permissions or a policy directly to that user. AWS has 1,180 pre-made permissions or AWS managed permissions that you could use from. So what do I want to attach to this user? To that user which we created called Primus Learning User, I want to attach administrator access. So I'm attaching administrator access to this user so that he should be able to do any tasks that he likes in AWS. So I'll go to next. You see, this is the policy that we're attaching to this user. And we'll go ahead and just add. Now, this user has permissions. You see, policy name is administrator access, and it is an AWS managed job function. So it permits this user now to be able to do anything inside this account apart from that billing, because AWS restricted the billing later. Administrators could do everything in an AWS account. So if I log out now, you see, we've added permissions to this user. This user now is authorized to do everything in this AWS account. This user was previously authenticated. He had the the authentication permissions to be able to access this account, but this user didn't have the authorization to access and perform actions on resources. But now we just added permissions to this user called administrator access, and this user now is able to do what? Is authorized. The user is authorized to perform actions, to access resources and do things. Now we'll log out again and log in back as this user. Remember, I want to log back in as that user. So log back in. I needed that AWS account actually, and log in as that user. And let's see if we have, let's see. Okay, that's the alias. The username is the alias. Let's see the username again. I think that's the alias for that user, I think so. Let's see if it allows us in. Okay, so let's log back into the root user and get the thing and get the so Primus Learning Series something something and get the AWS account. I just want to grab the AWS account real quick. because we need it. So let me grab the AWS account for this user, which is here, and log back out. Just make sure I copy it and log back out, and then log back in as that user. So I want to log back in as that IAM user, and that's the user we'll be using going forward. So I want to log back as that IAM user and paste that account ID here. Now it will take us here, you see, then we can access it as that user because we will still remember the username. So we want to go in. Now we're inside as that user. See how our dashboard will look. Now we have permissions to do everything. We don't see all those ugly errors again here. We have access to create the EC2 resources. We have access to do every other thing in this AWS account, guys. We have the access to do anything in this AWS account right now. You see how IAM works, right? IAM is able to authorize users to do different things, And if we go back to IAM now, it even has access to delete users. It has access to delete users. This user has access to create users and to delete users. You see, you can see that there's one user and this is the user. So if it deletes itself, it will just log out itself, right? So we don't want to do that. All right. And so this is users and groups. Now you could also attach this user to a group. You can attach this user to a group. Let's say the user was just, so let's log back out of this user and log back with our root user actually, so that I explain more. So if we log back in as our root user, which is this one, and want to use Primus learning series, which is this, let me just save this and this. So let me go back to IAM and explain a little bit. All right, so you see that we have a group here called administrators. We have this group here called administrators. You could also create a user and you could, let's say your organization is divided into 5 departments and each department would have particular permissions. Maybe you want the administrators to have all the access. All people who are maybe big boys, who are account managers should have, or who are managers should have administrator access. Now you will simply create the users and add them to the administrator users. So let's say your organization has 4 groups: administrators, developers, what am I doing? Developers. I don't know how to spell again. Developers. So you can create the developers group and then maybe attach permissions to that developer group. Let's say the developers are supposed to have EC2 full access. You just grant them EC2 full access, right? You've created the group called developers group. They have access, they would have access only to EC2. And let's say your finance team, say finance, you want to create a group called the finance team, and you want to give them only S3 access because they need, you see, S3 full access. They need that access to be able to access data that is found in S3. Let's say your organization has just those 3 groups, right? And now you want to create users for your organization. You create a second user, maybe called John, and John is a developer. You need to add John. So if you want to grant them console access, you can do that. But for now, just for demo purposes, we'll not do that. Now, I want to add John to a group. He is a developer. We'll simply add John here, right? He will inherit these permissions that have been added to this group already. So I just go to next and just click. You see, I will not go through the process of creating him and then going and adding permissions later to him. No, I've just added him to a group and he has inherited the permissions of that group, guys. So if I want to create another user here, I can create another user called Peter, and simply go ahead and say, hey, maybe I want Peter to have he's in the finance team. I want him to have all the only S3 access. He will not be able to access what these guys are accessing here. He will be only able to access S3. We'll learn what S3 is later, guys. Just understand that S3 is a service in AWS for now. All right, so I'll go ahead and create this user, and these different users have the type of access to access their various services as you've seen. I've added them to various groups. Very, very important, guys. You have to understand this. Very important. You also have what is called roles in AWS, and see how AWS defines it. An IAM role is an identity you can create that has specific permissions with credentials that are valid for short durations. Roles can be assumed by entities that you trust. So you create a role and it has permissions and credentials to do something, and that is valid for a short time. You typically define that time period that you want that user to have access, or that role to have access to do something. I can create a service in AWS, right, and attach an IAM role to that service. For instance, I can create an EC2 instance and attach an IAM permission to that. So IAM roles, right, a role to that EC2 instance to be able to go into into something, to be able to run something in AWS, to access another service. Services do not just have access to other services like that. For instance, I'm creating a Lambda function. That Lambda function doesn't have permissions to just go and delete an EC2 instance, or to terminate an EC2 instance. You have to explicitly tell that Lambda function to go and do this by assuming the permissions of the role. You see, roles can be assumed by entities that you trust. So if you trust that Lambda, you can give it a role to use the permissions of that role to assume, to do a certain action for you, right? You've trusted that entity, and so it can be able to do something for you. Now, roles are different from users. Roles have permissions just for a short period of time, or for short durations, depending on what you want, and they can be assumed by other services. It's absolutely important. You get to learn and understand this as we go ahead, right? I'll be showing you as we walk through the whole of this series. So this is absolutely important. And then the policies, I told you, these are the 4 things that we'll see today. We'll not look at other things, and these are the most critical ones. I'll show you these others later. The 4 important things are the user groups, the users, the roles, and the policies. The policies, as I told you, are simply objects in AWS that define permissions. These are objects in AWS that define permissions. And if you click on it, you see that it's just a statement. You see, this is simply a statement. That administrator, this is basically a JSON statement, right? And this provides full access to AWS services and resources. That's all it does. Once you add this statement to a user, that user has all the permissions to do everything. And that's why you see star here. Star in this thing called JSON simply means everything. You see, I'm simply telling this whoever will assume these permissions, that the effect of this thing that I'm doing here is to allow what action? I'm allowing everything. I'm allowing the person who assumed these permissions to be able to do everything, and on all the resources. You see, these are the resources, all or everything. The action is all actions, and the resources are every resource within this account. That is what this administrator permission does. Very powerful permissions. There's what is called least privileges in AWS. I'll be explaining those as we go along, right? AWS recommends that you give just least privileges for users and roles depending on what they need to do. So you don't always want to just give full access. You want to give permissions depending on what the users really need to do. Very, very important, guys. Absolutely important. All right, so you see there are different types of permissions here, or policies. AWS has 1,178 of them already. These are AWS managed policies. I can go ahead and create myself a policy. You see, I can go ahead and create myself a policy. This will be a customer managed policy that I'm creating. I can say, hey, I want to create a policy that grants S3 access to somebody, right? I'll just go here and say, hey, I want that person to be able only to write to S3, to write to a particular bucket in S3. You will learn what buckets are and all of those things, right? You will learn that later. So what I'll be doing is I'll be doing put object permissions. I'm simply doing it manually for now. I'll do put object. I want this person to be able to put objects in a particular S3 bucket. And or maybe I want them to put objects in all the buckets. You see, the resources here. You see, all the buckets in AWS. I can also specify one bucket. It's like a bucket in AWS is just like you remember your Google Drive or your Dropbox. It's like one thing in your Dropbox. I don't know how to put it. One bucket in your Dropbox, one location in your Dropbox or in your Google Drive. So I can say, hey, I want this user this permissions to be for everything in every S3 bucket. So I will do that and just go to next. And then I'll need to give this policy a name. So I'll just say S3 full, no, S3, I would then say write access, put object policy. So any user in this account can inherit this if you want to just grant them just this put object permissions. This user on this policy, once you inherit it or once you attach it to a user or a role, that entity will be able to do just one thing: write something into an S3 bucket, into all the S3 buckets here. So you can do that and create this policy. All right. So if I open this policy up, you will see a JSON file inside, right? Because we attach that policy to this, and so we can go ahead and see it, and you see that it will have just that right permission. So if I want to see it in JSON format, you see it has allow. This time the action is put object, right? It's not everything now. It has the action is put object, and this person who assumed this policy will be able to put objects in all S3 buckets in this account, guys. In all S3 buckets in this account. You see what it is saying? And then AWS will just give you a simple summary of what is done here. This is all what policies are. Policies are simple JSON documents that define permissions. Absolutely important. We will go over this as we go along, as we create things and go along, guys. Very, very important for all of us. So you need to master this as we go along, right? And I'll be showing you as we use and go, right? So this is the first method to create a user and attach a policy to that user. There is a second method that I'll go ahead and show you right now. The second method is using the AWS CLI, the command line. And to use that, you need to download and install a tool called the AWS CLI. So you go to AWS, just type download AWS CLI version 2. And then go to here, to the document, the first one, or to the version 2 one. You see? Go to the version 2 and select your machine type. So if your machine type is Linux, you select Linux. If it is a Mac OS, you select a Mac OS. If it is a Windows, you select a Windows. Mine currently is a Windows. So I will select for Windows, and you just need to download it, right? You see where it says download. If you click here, it will download. So this is the link to download the CLI and install. So once you download this, you download it as an MSI file and just click and you install next, and you install it. So I want you to install the AWS CLI. This is needed for this next thing. So this next one is another method to create a user but it is through the console. It is through a terminal. What is a terminal? So when I do CMD here, I'll open up a command prompt. Some people almost be like, oh my goodness, I'm seeing this thing that looks like this. No, it's very simple. I'll walk you through it and you see how simple this is. So I'll be here and I'll be able to run commands and it will create things for me in that AWS account. But first of all, guys, go ahead and download this. So go to https :// aws.cli.amazon.aws.com/AWS CLI v2.msi, and you should have it. All right. So once you've downloaded this, let's go ahead and log back into our AWS account. Remember, we created a user called Primus Learning User, right? We created this user, remember? Primus Learning User. Go ahead and create a user called Primus Learning and add administrator access to that user, guys. If you don't know how to do that, just watch the first part of this. You will understand how to do it. Attach permissions. Remember, to attach a permission to the user, you just go here and then you attach administrator permissions. I need you to do that. I need you guys to be able to do that. So once you've done that, I want you to create access keys. So we need these access keys to be able to access this AWS account from my command line. So we need to create something called an access key. So we'll go ahead and do that and click on this, select this first option which says command line interface. So if you are planning to use this access key to enable the AWS CLI to access your AWS account, so you do this. You remember I told you to download the CLI. Once you've selected that option, select confirm here and go to next. You can give it a description if you want, and then you create the the access keys. So I've created access keys. They will shield this one because that is a secret, right? It's like your password, but this is powerful as well, right? So I will need to copy this. So copy this first one. You can download it in a file. You see, this is a file here. You can download it to save it in your system because you will not find this again when this goes away. You will not see this again. This one will be available, but the secret key will not be available. So make sure you download this, guys. Very important. So once you've downloaded that, go ahead here. First, you have to have the CLI installed, which was just click next, 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 and you install after downloading that CLI. Then you will need to come here, do CMD on your terminal. So I just click here and type CMD, which is the command prompt. It's your command prompt. I just did that. And now, since I installed the CLI already, I want to just type AWS configure. Configure, it's not configuration, it's configure. And then I hit enter. Mine will probably have something or not. All right, so I don't have something. And then I put that access key that I created and hit enter. So I'll go back. So you see this one, I copied this one, access key. I will go now and copy the secret access key. Remember these words, access key and secret access key. I will go and copy the secret access key and come back. It is asking me for an AWS secret access key. The first one was AWS access key, which I put. AWS access key ID, I put it. It is asking me for AWS secret access key. I will now put this one, which I just copied. You can see it, but I'll just delete it afterwards. So don't bother about this, shielding it or something. And I hit enter. And it's asking your default region. Your default region. Remember those code names I was asking you that you will have to be using? US East 1. I want our default region to be US East 1. Remember, I told you the regions are the way AWS just divides its resources. You hear of availability zones. Those are like data centers within these regions that AWS identifies. So we'll be learning those as we go along. So the code name that I want to use here is called US East 1, US-East-1. Remember this, guys. This is the only thing you need. You don't even need to remember because you can simply just copy it from AWS, right? So the default one will be this, and I'll hit enter. The default output, you can just hit enter here, or you put JSON or table or whatever, but I'll just hit enter here. I don't need all of that. And then I'll clear my screen. I'll clear my screen. And now I have access to that AWS account through the terminal. I have access to that AWS account through the terminal. You see, I'm able to create things in this AWS account now using that access that I just did. I am able to create things in that AWS account. I can create another user now from that terminal. Why? Only because this user here, has permissions. Even if I created this key and this user was not having permissions here, I will show you later. If it did not have these permissions, I will still not be able to do what? To create anything in AWS. But this user has access, so it is able to create. So let me show you quickly how you can create an IAM user using this terminal. So you simply need to type AWS IAM. You see, you're calling the service IAM. I'll also need to just walk you through what the CLI means, right? So you're calling the service AWS IAM, Identity and Access Management. It's like you are asking, hey, IAM, go and do this for me. So what service do you want to use? It's like you telling AWS that you want to use IAM. It's a kind of program. You're using the AWS IAM API to create something for you. So you're passing through the service called IAM to do something for you. So you're saying AWS IAM as the user, you're currently this user. That is who you are. You are currently this user. So Primus Learning user is asking the AWS, the IAM API to go into AWS, into that account that we just configured above, to go in there and do what? And create user. That is the command that you're using. That's the option that you're using. The option is called create user. So AWS. So I am the user, Primus Learning user. I'm telling AWS IAM. So I'm telling that service called the IAM service to go and do what? To go and create a user for me. The keyword you have to notice here is create user. It is an option that you have to use. If you don't use it that way, it will not work, guys. So I'm telling it create user. And what is the username? This you have to define this correctly. Username -- user -name. It has to be this way, else it will fail. So AWS IAM create -user. And what is the username? Before you put the username, you have to put -- So user -name. What is the username you want to give this user? I want this user to be called Peter and John already exist. So I want this user to be called Primus Learning 2. I want this user to be called Primus Learning 2. And I'll just hit enter. See what happens. So it's thinking and it goes ahead and it creates that user. You see, it took me no time to do this. So it went ahead and created a user called what? Primus Learning. And it brought back an ID, the user ID, and an ARN. In AWS, there's something called Amazon Resource Name. This term here, you will still tell you more about it. ARN simply means Amazon Resource Name. Every resource that you create in AWS has an Amazon Resource Name, has an ARN. So the ARN is simply saying, ARN, what's the ARN? AWS. See, since it's an AWS service that you're creating, IAM. So you'll do this with colons in front of it. And then it will give you the account name, where this resource is being created so that it can be identified. What is it that you're creating? You're creating a user. If you're creating an IAM role, it will be an IAM role here, and then the username. That's it. The ARN is very simple. It is the ARN, the word ARN, or the letters, the characters ARN, and then colon, you have the AWS, always like that, and then colon, the service that you're creating. If it is EC2, you put EC2 here, and then double colons, right? Double colon, the account number, and then colon, the user in this case. What are you creating? You're creating a user. There are different entities. You could create a role, you could create a policy. This time we're creating a user. And then what is that username? Primus Learning. So it's very easy to know what an AWS ARN is. When you see this, you already know the service that you're talking about. You already know that it is IAM and it is a user that is being created in this account, and that username is Primus Learning 2. Very nice. And then it also gives you the timestamp, the time that it created that user, and this is the time. So you can actually track these resources, guys. So you see, we've created this user, but this user has no permissions. You see, we've not granted this user any permissions currently. Now, let's go back to the first user. Remember, this is the user we used to create it. Now, let's see something. Let's assume that you delete these permissions, you remove these permissions from this user and rerun that command again. We'll just change. So remove the permissions and let's rerun this and put 3 here. So it's like we're creating a new user. You see, we just remove the permissions from the first user that we had there, and we had administrator permissions on it. Let's run this and see what happens. You see, it has given an error because this user doesn't have access anymore. It doesn't have any permissions to do this. You see the error? In AWS, you have to be reading your errors. They always tell you exactly, I mean it, exactly what is going on wrong. You see, it tells you an error occurred. Access denied. This is absolutely important. Access denied. When calling the create user operation, this is why access has been denied when you were calling the create user operation. The operation we're doing was create user. So it's telling you in this error that access has been denied. And that access is denied when you were trying to call this operation. It's an API call. Remember, I told you it is about APIs. An API call is like you are sending, you go to a restaurant, sit down, and you're sending the waiter to go and bring you food. The waiter will come, take your menu and take everything that you want and bring it to the chef at the back of the kitchen. Once the chef finishes cooking, the waiter will take the food again back to you. It's the same thing. You are calling a waiter, you've called a waiter, which is the AWS IAM API, and you're sending it to go and perform an action, to go and create a user, right? Through this command here. And it's gone and it's not able to create. Why? You see the reason here, right? Access has been denied. And what's the user? The user is called Primus Learning. This is the user. You see the user ARN, right? So you know that it is an IAM user called Primus Learning user that is trying to do this action, but it is not authorized. Oh, there's no way we can explain this anymore, right? It is not authorized. It did not say it is not authenticated. No, that's not what it said. It said it is not authorized. Why is it not authorized? Because remember, we just removed the permissions. Now this user here is an empty user. It's an empty user. It doesn't have permissions. We've removed its permissions. And you can see that ARN. This is the same ARN here. You see, this is the same ARN here, right here. It's the same ARN right here. And it's telling us that user is not authorized to perform this action, to perform IAM create user. It is not authorized because we have removed that authorization. We have removed the permissions. It is not authorized to perform what? To perform create user on which resource? It will give you the ARN of the resource you wanted to create. You wanted to create what? You wanted to create a user called Primus Learning. So it's telling you you are not authorized to do this action on this resource because no identity-based policy allows the IAM create user action. Why? You see the reason? No identity-based policy. We have removed the policy. No identity-based policy allows the IAM create user action. Because we have removed that identity here, let me add that permission again. You see, we removed it. So if I go here and just do attach, or I can just put it under administrators, right? Remember, administrator has the admin permissions. I can just do that and add. Now you see, I have added it again. And now this user is allowed again. So if I run this command again, you see, I'll just do this. This is the same command again. If I run this command again, because we've added back that permission, let's see what happens. Now it has gone ahead and created that user because it now has permissions. We have added permissions to this user to be able to do this. Now this user is authorized to perform the action that it was denied the previous time. You see what the policies would do. You see what a user can do when they have permissions, guys. This right here is the heart of it. If you know this, you know your thing. If you know this, you already know your thing very well. So guys, play around with this. Read documentations, even read about the CLI, what the CLI is. So the CLI, this topic describes how to install or update the latest release of the AWS command line interface on this. So you can learn what the AWS command line is all about. Read on the AWS command line, right? Read on the AWS command line. Just get, you see, about the AWS CLI. If you go there, the AWS command line interface is an open source tool that enables you to interact with AWS services using commands in your command line shell. With minimal configuration, the AWS CLI enables you to start running commands that implement functionality equivalent to that provided by the browser-based AWS Management Console from the command prompt in your terminal. You could actually use this command line commands to add them to what? To add them to your shell script if you know how to write shell script. We will be learning that as we go. We're learning a lot of things as we go, guys. So this is absolutely important. There is yet another way that you could do this same action that we did. But before that, let's just, you remember we just created these users, this Primus Learning 2 and Primus Learning 3. They don't have permissions. Now, if I wanted to complete the action, I will need to add permissions to it, right? So I will need to add I'll need to add administrator permissions to these two users. So the command to do that is simple as well. AWS IAM. I think you guys can already start understanding what this is all about. Attach, you see, I want to attach permissions. Attach dash user dash policy. I want to attach user policy to what? To a user. So I'll have to give the user name here. Primus Learning, I think it's Primus Learning 2. You can actually give two of them, but let's just do one for now. Primus Learning 2, and then you have to put dash dash policy ARN, and then you pass the policy ARN right here. So the policy ARN is the ARN of that policy that you want to attach. So if you go to AWS and look at IAM and go to these policies and search for this policy, you will see its ARN. You see, this is administrator access. So it's asking for this ARN right here. So it will be AWS ARN. So I'll just copy that. You see? So it's asking you to provide dash dash policy ARN. So you need to pass the policy ARN right here, guys, which is just what I pasted here. When I run this action, this user 2, will now have, currently that user doesn't have any permissions. So if I go to users and I go to refresh, this user 2 here currently doesn't have any permissions. You see, it can't perform any actions. But now, if I go ahead and run this command on it, it will have the permissions. Oh, I missed something. So I missed, let's see what I missed. AWS, so the error says to help text, it doesn't see the AWS command, AWS IAM error. The following arguments are required: dash dash username or dash dash username. Sorry, I didn't pass the username. I missed that step. You see, we didn't add username to it. That is wrong. I did a wrong thing. So I did attach policy and I forgot to put the username before the user. So I need to put dash dash user dash name and then space this user. You see it needs all of these actions, else you have this error, but you have to read what the error is all about, guys. So you see I missed dash dash user name. Very important. You don't have to miss that. All right, let's run. And now the permissions have been added to this user. If I go ahead and refresh, take a while, you see that this user now has the administrator permissions, guys. It now has administrator permissions. You can do the same thing for the other user that we call 3. That user currently doesn't have permissions. So if you just do that, it will then have permissions again. All right, so it's gone ahead. If we go back to AWS and it's added permissions to the user called Primus Learning 3. This one, Primus Learning 3. So if you see here, you see that it now has AWS. It is authorized to perform actions in AWS, and it has all the permissions, administrator permissions, guys. It has all the permissions. So this is the second method to do these type of actions. There is yet another method, which is the last one I will show you for this video. I know it's longer, but it gives you the 3 options that you will see. This one would be the most used in organizations. This is the recommended method once you've started working as an AWS architect or as an AWS cloud engineer or as an AWS system administrator. This right here is the method that is, the big method. This method will use a tool called Terraform. So we want to use infrastructure as code to create that same user and attach that same permission to do this same action that we're doing. So what you need to do is to install another tool called Terraform, So if I run Terraform here, it will show me whether I have Terraform installed or not. So if I do this, and it takes some time, yes, I have Terraform installed. But you may not have Terraform installed in your AWS or in your account, in your laptop. So you need to go here and say down install Terraform on Windows. Just type that and search, and it'll bring you install Terraform. I think there are different ways to install it. Even Microsoft is giving another way here. I don't know what this way is. It's a 23. This one is published in 2023, so it's probably a new way using bash something. So it will show you how to install things. If you're using Windows, you just use this to install it. So it tells you install Terraform for Windows. So it gives you this link. This will take you back to the document we're looking before. You see, it will ask you to do this. It just takes you back to the AWS console. So for Terraform, you can download this depending on your machine type. For Windows, sorry, you can download it here, right? And then you just execute. So you download, you see, it will take me to download, it will download that file, and then I would just remove and put it in your path and put it in your in your environment variable. So you explore this document, just use this document and install it. So you see it says download that. From the download, extract the executable to a directory of your choosing. So you can put it, for instance, in this directory. Update your system global path. So this is what I told you about environment variables. I'll not use this laptop because it will not allow me for now. And then once you've done that, open the terminal and just type terraform dash version and it should be already installed. So once you download this, it wants you, just follow this documentation, guys. Just go to this documentation right here. You should be able to do it. And I got to that documentation just by typing, just by typing install terraform, and I was able to, so it's opened up. That's the exe. So I just typed install terraform on Windows and I went to that documentation. You could also use this one directly. This one is the same one like this. You just download, and then it's asking you to open this file, copy this path. So copy this exe. You are, of course, you need to extract it. Copy this exe and go with it to your, as the document says, go with it to your path. You can just click this path here and it will take you to that path. Show you what the path looks like here. So it will probably show you how to go to the path, right? So this is it. Go to control panel, this, and then it just walks you through how to do that. So you should be able to do this. And once you do that, you have Terraform installed. And now you can type Terraform here and Terraform should work. Also, I want you guys to install a simple tool, another simple tool called VS Code. So just say install VS Code on Windows. That's the tool we'll be using from time to time. I want you guys to install VS Code. It's just Visual Studio Code. So you can just go here and download it. It's just quick download and then you just run. You see, just download for Windows if you have a Windows, for Mac if you have a Mac, and other things if you have others, right? So you just download VS Code and then run install, and it should give you something like this. Once you run it, just type VS Code here. You see, it will bring you up this app that is looking this way. All right, now I've created a file in my directory here, in my documents directory called Primus Learning Series. That's just a folder. I just created the folder called Primus. So if I do Primus Learning Series, PP, let me just type P, is download P, where is it? Oh, shoot. Primus Learning Series. Yeah, it's somewhere, right? I saw it. It's gone again. So I just created, this is the file. I just created a folder rather called Primus Learning Series by right clicking and creating it. And then once you've opened up your VS Studio, you see, you can just go to file and do open and just go to that path or to where you kept Primus Learning. So go to I'm under my documents, I'll just search for P and then just open, and you'll open it up like this. And now I want you to create a file in here. I want you guys to create a file in here and just call the file, just call that file main.tf. That's all I want you guys to do. Create that file. It will be called main.tf. And this file will only work if you have Terraform installed and that you've done that AWS configure. You followed this video correctly and you've done the AWS configure. That's when it will work, guys. So it will not work if you did not do those parts. It has to follow the same things that we've done for you to be able to do that. All right. All right. So in here, you want to give a provider. You want to do a provider. So if you go into Terraform is a tool. You see, Terraform is a tool. So you go to Terraform documentations, you see that it's a tool that is an infrastructure as code tool that you use to create resources, right? So you can just go into AWS and give it a provider. And the provider we want to use is this provider right here. You can just go to AWS and copy this provider. So just copy this part here and go back to your VS Code thing and put it here. So you want to have this provider, and your provider should be pointing you to US East 1. What is an AWS provider? An AWS provider, in Terraform, as you can see here, you see, this is like a plugin that these people have built. So you use the Amazon Web Services provider to interact with many resources supported by AWS. You must configure the provider with the proper credentials before you can use it. Remember, we did AWS configure and we did all that. So this would install the AWS provider once you run it to be able to use Terraform and run things in your AWS environment. You see, you can provide the provider with a particular version. You see, this one is using this version and so on and so forth. So you could use a particular version to do the provider, or you could do it the same way. We'll learn Terraform once we keep going ahead, but I just want to show you that you can do this and be able to create resources another way, right? So I've put my provider here, and the next thing I want to do is I just want to define a resource that I will create. So I've typed the word resource there, and in inverted commas opened and closed, I want to create a resource called AWS IAM User. You see it's inside this thing here, and then I'll skip and give it a name, and this has to be inside inverted commas open and close again. So I want to call this thing user, and then I open a bracket again. I'll just open a bracket like that, this type of bracket, and inside I'll give the resource I want to create a name, right? This will be called Primus Learning 4. You see, I'm creating a user. I'm creating a user. This one is the name, the generic name that it's picking up. But the important term that I'm using here is AWS IAM User, because I'm using the service called the AWS IAM User. It is a resource in AWS. So I want to create a user called Primus Learning 4, right? And not to stop, I can do this and automatically attach the policy directly again here. I can do so many things from within one file using Terraform. So what I can do is I can go to the documentation. The documentation tells you everything. You can search here and say attach user. You will see it will give you the command to use to attach a user. So you can search IAM here. You see, search for IAM, the IAM service, and simply scroll down to IAM as a service. You see IAM, and then you look for user, IAM user, or create user, IAM role. You see IAM role here. We talked about the IAM role, but this time we're looking for the user, which is this one. This is the IAM user. You simply click on it and you see all the documentation about it. Very nice. And then if you want to attach, you see AWS IAM user policy attachment. You simply click there. It will take you to the sample code that you need to use for attachment. And that's all what it would do for you. Like you already see it. It will say resource, and then it will give you AWS IAM policy. You see AWS IAM policy or attachment. It normally has updated these things from time to time, right? This is the policy you want to use, and then this is the attachment, right? This is the attachment right here. So you just copy the attachment part and bring it down here. Since we are not creating we don't want to create a policy yet. The policy is existing. We want to just attach the policy and just paste. And then this is the correct statement that you need. maybe just give it a name. This is a name that you want to give the results. Maybe just say attach. Or you can just say attach like that. Or attach policy. Attach policy, sorry. And then here is the username. You can pass it directly. For now, we can pass it directly, right? So you can say AWS IAM user, and then we'll pick this user up here. The username, you pick this user. You see IAM user, AWS IAM user. You're giving it AWS IAM user. So it will pick this AWS IAM user dot name. You pick the name of this IAM user here. That's what you're using. So we're using this variable up here. We already defined it here as AWS IAM user. So you want to use the same statement, AWS IAM user, and dot the username, which is this. So dot, you pick this name, and the name will be Primus Learning 4. And then you attach a policy to it. You can pass the policy directly if you have the policy ARN defined somewhere up here. But now we can pass that policy directly because that policy ARN. Remember, we know the policy ARN somewhere, right? The policy ARN, remember the policy ARNs were coming up when we were creating. So the policy ARN for this user is an administrator policy. So we can form the policy ourselves. We already know how the ARN will look. So it will be ARN, AWS, remember, colon, the service was IAM, right? You remember? And then colons, and AWS, because that's what we're using, right? And policy slash administrator access. Remember the access we are granting is administrator access. That's the policy in AWS, and that's it. And then this one is saved. Make sure you save the file. And then you could just right click here and open a terminal here. I'm doing this because from time to time we'll be working with this terraform. I'll basically introduce you in another video with what terraform is all about. So if you do this and save and just type here terraform init, type terraform init and run. If it gives you an error, then you need to figure out what that error is, or you can put it in a comment section and I should be able to help you. So you run that, it will initialize. So it will go and download and install this provider, this AWS provider in your system, because it will use that provider. The access it's using to access AWS is the access that we configured. So it's using that access key and secret access to have access to your AWS environment. So it's still installing. It's taking a sweet time. Let's give it a moment. Looks like this video has it's been going on for a while. All right, let's give it a moment, guys, for this action to complete. So it's just installing a couple of things on this machine. Once it's done, it will show us green there, and we'll be able to run other things, and I'll explain, and that's it for tonight. This tool right here is the recommended method, and this is the way organizations will create resources. And it is very effective. So I'll be introducing you to what Terraform is. You will be learning it along this course as we go. So if you come here and just search what is Terraform, right? And just search what is Terraform, you will see a ton and tons of things about Terraform. You see that Terraform is an infrastructure as code software or something. HashiCorp Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool that lets you define both cloud and on-premise resources in human readable configuration files. So it creates its files that are in human readable method, right? In human readable configuration files that you can version, reuse, and share. You can then use a consistent workflow to provision and manage all of your infrastructure throughout its life cycle. So you see how I was manually creating resources in AWS. I can make errors, right? I can create one and forget that I've added permissions and I send it out and users start complaining. But with this, once you have your file, you can create it and reuse it over and over and over. You see, it tells you how Terraform works. Terraform creates and manages resources on cloud platforms and other services through their application programming interfaces called APIs, right? And providers enable Terraform to work with virtually any cloud services, any cloud platforms, right? So you have Azure providers, you have AWS providers, you have Google provider. You can use Terraform. It is cloud agnostic, which means it is not dependent on one cloud platform. It works with all other platforms and other tools. You can use Terraform with Ansible providers, with different providers. It has over 100 providers, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So it has so many providers. You could go here and you see the various providers. You see HashiCorp and Terraform community have already written thousands of providers. I was talking of 100, thousands of providers to manage many different types of resources and services. You can find all publicly available providers on this registry right here. So you see the various providers that you can use with Terraform, right? So Terraform is a big, big boy when it comes to different providers. Look at Google Cloud, Alibaba, and so on and so forth with different modules and different things, right? So you can do see all here to see everything. Look at every, looks like everything has a provider, right? Everything has a provider. So many. And these are the official providers. All right, so let's go back here. I'm sure it's initialized. Yes, it finished initializing. So you see it created a file here called a .terraform file and it unlocked this system. Why is it locking it? Because it doesn't want that as you're creating this, somebody is creating it at the same time. We'll explain this when we are really, really going deep into Terraform. All right, now I want to just run Terraform plan. I want to plan to see what will be created when I run this. So if I just run Terraform plan there, it will give me a plan and it will return a state file to tell me, hey, these are the resources that will be created. So I want to see the number of resources that will be created. You see, I told you create a state file here. This is the state file that is created and it's created against that particular account. So if I open up this state file, you will see that there are different, oops, unable to, okay, because it's still running anyway, cancel. It's still running, still trying to run here. All right, so I can open the file now, but it's gone anyway. So you see, these are the resources that it will create for me. Terraform used the selected provider to generate the following execution plan. It will go and create an IAM user. Every green that you see here, right, it's what will be created. So it will create something called an ARN, and that will be known after we have created the resources, after they apply. We'll create first destroy something, ID, name, we'll create the name called Primus Learning. This name is already known because we gave it. We have not given any tags, we have not given any unique ID, it will know after creation. So it will create a user and then it will attach a policy to that user. You see, it will attach a policy to that user. The policy will be this. This is the name we gave it up there. This is the policy ARN. We already know the policy ARN and the policy, the user to where it will be attached is Primus Learning 4. And then it's giving you a summary of it. It's planning to create 2 resources. So it will add 2 resources. 0 resource will be changed and 0 resource will be destroyed. So it already plans and gives you a plan of what would happen. And then I can go ahead and do Terraform apply. When you do Terraform apply, it will ask you, do you really want to create these resources? And you will say yes. So if I do Terraform apply and say yes, it will ask me whether I want to go ahead with creation. I will say yes. And then it will approve. It will go ahead and create all the resources in no time. You see, it's taking its sweet time, but it's faster in depending on your system. And I can maintain this file, right? And I can share this file in GitHub, and teams can use the same file to create resources in their environment so that they are consistent. You see, it's asking me to enter yes or no. I will enter yes, and it will simply go ahead and create these resources. And it's creating, and you're seeing the output, you're seeing everything as it is creating. You see, user is creating, and it's done creating. So if I go now into AWS, I'll see that the user has been created, and it's also attached policies to it. So if I go here to AWS and go to IAM, I should see a fourth user, and it's been created. So if I refresh here, I should see a fourth user, and a policy has been attached to it called administrator access. Now I can go ahead and delete this quickly, right? You see, with those ones, I'll have to manually go and delete them. But with this one, if I just do, instead of apply, I just do destroy and just say auto approve here, because I don't want to answer that yes afterward. And just go ahead and run. It will just destroy this user, and that's it. I cannot destroy the other users that I created with other things, right? Because Terraform doesn't manage the state of those resources. This state file here just gives me the state of my environment, of my AWS account, on the resources that are managed by Terraform. Currently, they are not managed. The other users I created manually or through the CLI are not managed through Terraform. So this one cannot delete those ones. You see, it's telling you it will destroy the two resources. See, it will destroy. So now it's destroyed. If you go back to the refresh, you will not see this user anymore. This user is no longer existing. It's been destroyed by Terraform. You see how quick that was? But now, if I have to create this and go in and manually delete, I'll go and then do delete and delete and delete. If I created all of these resources here, I could just duplicate this right here and create 100 resources at the same time, or 200 or 300. And then I'll just manage it in one file. You see, we use just one file called main.tf to create all of this. This was really it, guys. All right, so guys, that's it for today. So what we did was, just to recap, we defined what IAM was. We created, we created an IAM user and granted some permissions to that user, or attach a policy to that user, and that user was able to access some resources within AWS. That's all we did. The resources could be different resources, right? EC2 instances, RDS, and so on and so forth. When we come the next time, we'll create another user in our next series. We'll create another user and actually use them to do work with these resources, with some of these resources that I've defined here, and we'll go ahead and see more details on how IAM works again before we continue. So thanks guys so much for watching today's episode. Ensure that you delete your resources and leave just one. You can leave this one. So delete these two. I'll just go ahead and delete the two. Just type delete here and delete them, because I want to, this one is already gone anyway. I want to have just, just this user in there. I'll use it again in our next class. So you see these users have been deleted. I'll go ahead and delete John and Peter as well and leave just one. You don't want to have many resources just hanging there, but this is not charged anyway. So I'll just clean it up. You want to have a clean account, right? So just go ahead and do that. And that will be it for today's video. Guys, please subscribe to our channel, leave us comments, and let us know what your thoughts are about this video. And of course, our series will continue. I'll continue to work on more videos. Our next video will be coming up very soon. So hit the notification button so that you are notified once the video is up. Thanks guys for watching. Bye-bye.